No hyvä, herra jestas. Voi että on ihanaa olla tämmöisessä live-tapahtumassa. Tätähän ei sitten striimata mihinkään, mutta meillä on tarkoitus ottaa nauhoite. Ja mikäli siitä tulee minkään laatuinen, niin sitten julkaistaan myöhemmin. Mutta tervetuloa tosiaan tänne arkkitehti Robert Patzschken vierailuluennolle, huippuluennolle, sanoisin suorastaan. Mä olen Marjo Uotila ja edustan täällä järjestävää seuraa Info Finland ry:tä ja Rakennusteollisuus RT ja Urbaaria instituutti Helsingin yliopistosta ovat myös tässä yhteisponnistuksessa järjestäjänä ja kutsujana Suomeen. Eli me ollaan saatu nyt aivan fantastinen tähti esiintyjä Suomeen kertomaan traditionaalisen, klassistisen uuden arkkitehtuurin noususta, erityisesti nyt sitten Saksan kontekstissa, mutta vähän ehkä laajemminkin. Ja nyt ekstra bonuksena vielä, mitä ei ole missään meidän markkinoinnissa ja viestinnässä, mitä ehkä olette huomanneet jossain kanavissa, niin mainittukaan edes toiveunena, niin meillä on täällä mukana myös virolainen arkkitehti Allan Strus, josta suurin osa porukasta ehkäpä hänet tunnistaa, kun hän on ollut meillä paljon mediassa esillä, hänen ihanat suunnitelmansa, joita toistaiseksi ei ole vielä Suomessa saatu toteutettua, mutta mediassa on ollut erittäin paljon positiivista huomioon, niin Allan Strus on täällä myöskin ja sanoo muutaman sanan sitten tämän Robert Patzschken luennon päätteeksi. Ja sen verran vielä, mitä tuossa on sanonut tuosta osallistujalistasta, niin se kiertää siellä jossain. Ja laittakaa sinne oman tuntonne mukaan yhteystietojanne, niin saatte myöhemmässä vaiheessa luennosta ainakin tallenteen ja sitten myöskin Info Finlandilta mahdollista viestintää, jos kiinnostaa vaikkapa yhdistystoiminta tai miten voimme yhdessä edistää kauniimpaa, parempaa, laadukkaampaa, inhimillisempää, traditionaalisempaa, klassisempaa rakentamista arkkitehtuuria Suomessa. Ja tilaisuuden kesto on noin tunti. Katsotaan miten päästään, mutta 5 täällä ilmeisesti vahtimestariporras laittaa ovet lukkoon, että siihen mennessä pitää olla ainakin pois tästä tilasta. Ja tosiaan jos olette Twitterissä, niin ottakaa kuvia ja laittakaa Twitteriin tästä viestiä. Mä yritin keksiä jonkun hyvän hashtagin, mutta laittakaa nyt vaikka hashtag #intpau, jos ette muuta keksi. Patzschke, mä kirjoitan sen aina nimittäin väärin. Suomalaisista on äärimmäisen vaikea kirjoittaa oikein, mutta kirjoittakaa myös hashtag Patzschke, jos haluatte, mutta #intpau menee helpommin oikein. Mutta siis pidemmittä puheitta englanninkielinen luento alkaa nyt. Welcome, Robert Patzschke.
Thank you very much. Of course, I didn't understand a word of what Mario said, but thank you very much for coming here today, and thank you very much for taking the time off to listen to a few words. Thank you to Mario, first of all, for organizing this event. We met a couple of times in Berlin and exchanged our views on architecture. And of course, thank you to the University of Helsinki that we can use this space and the Confederation of Finnish Construction Industries. Yeah, I'm here today to show a little bit about of our work that we do in our architecture firm. And before that, I want to give you a little insight of what I understand or how I understand traditional architecture and why I think it is an appropriate means even today to use that kind of architectural language. I'm always saying that I think it is a way, a means, but not the way, because I think we are all thinking different. So, and I don't think I can persuade anyone or convince anyone. So I'm only sharing my personal view. And then, of course, everybody can have their own view. So let me start with a short introduction of myself and my company. My name is Robert Patzschke. I come from a family of architects. My grandfather was an architect before the Second World War, but unfortunately he died on the last day of the war, and my father and my uncle, identical twins, they set up the firm again then after the war in the around 1968-69. So we celebrated our 50th anniversary a couple of years ago, and we can look back at quite a long history of architecture within our family. And today I'm running the firm with a couple of my cousins and some other partners. So here are two of my cousins and two other partners, myself. And we have two teams that we work on. Let's say the original head office where I work with two cousins, we have around 35 people, and then we have another team which is run by my other cousin where we have almost another 30 people. So it's a substantial size, and so we do a lot of projects from all sizes, from small projects to larger projects, and it is fun. I might come back again one or two times to the fact that my father and my uncle are identical twins, because that is to me and to the way we think probably also of importance. Or maybe I'll start with that right now. We started doing more classical architecture around 25 years ago. I was a student at the time, and that led, of course, to a huge controversy and a hard fighting and bashing actually through the media, through the architectural critics in Germany. And I think if you are trying to face that alone, it's always hard to overcome things. So the two of them, they were always together, and together they were able to go through even this difficult times. But the other aspect that I think is more important about the twinhood is that they were always looking for harmony. They always were together, they always looked alike, and they were always going perfectly together, and there was no need for them to want to be better than the other. They were always in harmony with each other, and that kind of harmony they also tried to see in every other aspect of life, in the family, in the upbringing of their children, within the office, and also within the architecture. So for them, the concept of provocation and confrontation was never really a way that they could think about. So I might come back to the early stages later on. I'll run you through a few ideas that I feel that are important to create good architecture. Whereas my father and my uncle, or our firm, initially set up this or started this way of designing intuitively. I tried, of course, to see why do we do it, because we are doing it for a reason. We are not doing it just for the sake of doing traditional architecture, but because it has a reason. And there are a couple of points that I've identified in that way. And one important point, I think, is a sense of perspective. Now here in this picture we see maybe from the 60s two people, a client and an architect, looking at a project, a large-scale project. And already the way they look at it shows you that there is something wrong with the perspective. Yeah. We as normal people, when we experience a place, a city, anything in the built environment, we look at it, we walk through it at a normal eye level height, and that is also how we should perceive architecture while we plan it. And especially in a lot of large-scale projects, skyscrapers, high-rise buildings, big blocks, you you observe or in the design process, you look at the projects from above. You look at the grid of the cityscape, and you take up some lines, and then you create some intellectual concept. But very often, it's missing the part for the normal people to just walk around. And in every design that we do in our office, we do sketches from art. I don't have any sketches in my presentation that's why I will pass around these 2 books. In fact, we do all the drawings in our office, all the initial concepts we do as hand sketches, because we think that this is in that way, we are not stopped in our creative process, whereas if we were doing it in the computer immediately, then you already have to say, okay, I'm drawing in a parallel in 80 centimeter distance. So in that way, I think you can, maybe you want to have a look and just pass it around. So it's just a collection of hand sketches. So scale, I think, is a very important point. Of course, you can also have beautiful examples in more graphic designs. For example, here's an example from Oscar Niemeyer, of course, very well known in the city of Brasilia, the administrative center. So that can have a great quality, even if you look at it from a far distance. But I think these are very rare projects where it's only important to have these graphic qualities. The more important part is that you are able to come to it at a very close way and experience it. Another point that I want to get into is what I call granularity. And I'm showing here a contemporary building. Both of it is brand new, just completed last year. It's the new, the reconstruction of the Berlin City Palace, together with an addition by Stella, the new part. And so both of it is new. Both of it has not been there before, or in between it was not there. And I want to take this example to give you an idea of of one point that I want to make. I'm sorry, I just have to get my glasses. I'll give you a definition of granularity, which I got from Wikipedia or so. So granularity is a material or system which is composed of distinguishable pieces or grains. It can either refer to the extent to which a larger entity is subdivided, so we have here a larger entity that is subdivided, or to the extent to which groups of smaller entities have joined together to become a large entity. For example, in a cityscape here, all these buildings, or we have here the piazza next door, all the buildings together, they form then again one entity. So what I think is important is that you are able to read a building. I'm showing some more slides afterwards of another building to underline my point, that you have to have a certain complexity. You should be able to read the building at various scales, at various distances. So here you can see in 1 square meter of facade, we have so many grains, so many small details that are that there's enough to capture our attention to stimulate us. Whereas here in the whole building of, let's say, 100 meter, we have exactly 5 grains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and I think, and we don't even know where the entrance of the building is. Here it is very clear, and if you go around, you know where it is. Here we have to actually make a signboard to see where the entrance is. Of course, this can also have a quality together. I'll come to that in a moment. But what I feel what is important is that you are able, as I said, to come and experience a building from various distances. So in a classical building, this is a building here, the Berlin Zeughaus, the former arsenal, the oldest building on Unter den Linden, which is not so relevant at this moment, but it's a good building to approach. So we can see from a distance already a certain structure with a pediment in the center and some statues on top. And the closer we get, the more we can see. We can see we have arches on the ground floor, the entrance, the columns, the pediment, and the closer we get, the more there's to discover. We can see the keystones with the sculptures, and even when I enter the building, probably the door handle has again some elaborate detail. Now, I'm not saying that we need to do this in that complexity in all our buildings today, but I think it is important that you have something that can grab that attention and keep on that stimulus. Now, if I look at the backside of the building, I see here a building or an extension to that that has become the German Historic Museum, this building. And EMP, one of my most favorite modern architect, has built this extension to it. I always feel that it is important to compare good things with good things. I could also compare, I could choose 1,000 bad examples from the 50s, 60s, 70s, but that is not the point what I want to make. And I'm not here also to do to be polemic and do a bashing on modern architecture. It's just that I want to explain these points. So from my point of view, this building, you approach it from a distance, let's say at a distance of, say, 100 meters or so. You have more or less understood the shape. In the earlier stela, probably even at a further distance. And when you come closer to it, you don't really experience much more. Yeah, maybe I'm doing a little bit injustice here to this building because it's a really fantastic example, and in the interior there are some interesting elements. But what I feel here is that after a certain point, you don't experience more, and you lose that stimulus. And if I walk along this road, my eye just washes away on the glossy surface of the building. Now, of course, these things can go well together. Like here in this particular case, you have the traditional old building, the historic building, and you have the modern new building. And again, they can complement each other. But from my understanding, it's usually the classical, the old, the historic building that adds more to that than the modern. And again, we have here the idea of the granularity of the total entity, because then together we can say, okay, it's a great concept, and together it works, but only because we have one part of it that has that complexity in its design. And we can have that in all kinds of scales. We can have that with two buildings next to each other. We can have that within one building. I don't know if you have these examples in Helsinki a lot. In Berlin we add a lot of we build the attic roofs on the old buildings. So very often you have an old building and then you have a modern roof on top, and that develops an interesting composition. But I feel that if we had a city that was only made of these elements, that then we will end up with something that is not satisfactory the way that we see traditional and historic centers. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I go on holiday to any country, like Helsinki, for example, I look at the historic center. Very rarely I go and see the modern districts. I think in Paris, maybe a few architecture students might go to La Défense to see that, but in general, the people go to the historic centers, and that already shows us that there is something more to it than just beauty. Now, of course, we have also started with modern architecture in our firm. This is a building, one of the early buildings from 1974 in Berlin from our office. So it took us really a long time to go through this process. But but eventually we realized that we have to take a new road, a new path. Now, let me come back here one more time, because there are 2-3 more things. I just realized that there's 1 or 2 slides missing here. Now, that complexity and that kind of granularity, you could say you can achieve that with all kinds of architectural languages or with all kinds of methods. And I think that is actually true. There's not only traditional architecture that you can that can be the solution. For example, if you see the Lloyd's building in London, I don't know if anyone has that in front of their eyes. It's a very complex building, and probably it has that granularity, but still there is a lack in harmony. So I think the traditional architecture is so good and so important because it has developed over such a long time. So it's almost become a kind of collective collective memory. So because we have seen these elements, we've grown up with them, and because they have been refined over centuries with trial and error, they are in such good proportion that that I think they show a very good way, and probably also the easiest way to achieve that sort of complexity and granularity that make up a good architecture. In our firm, we've been called many names. As I said earlier, we had a huge controversy in Berlin, a big debate when the Hotel Adlon was built. I'm showing pictures of it afterwards. And so they say you're copycats, you're historicists, postmodern, or pastiche, or even atavistic. So there were all kinds of names. And we like to call it classical traditional architecture. Now, tradition is something, and I want to read out again a definition because I think it is so nice. Tradition is actually something that is very alive. Of course, we can also talk about dead traditions that look at them from an historic point of view, but This definition is so beautiful. Tradition, it is the passing on of specific beliefs or behaviors, customs or actions, in our case an architectural language, through a playful handling or intuitive repetition. And that I really like, a playful handling and intuitive repetition. It's not that we have a canon of elements and we have to repeat them. It's by using these elements in an intuitive way that we change them and adjust them every now and then, and then they are refined and also taken into the future. So through and this is done within a group, which through this action develops into a larger, into a distinguishable culture. In our case, the European architectural tradition. It is thus the basis for the creation of culture. It is something that is derived from the past, but which is not necessarily appropriate and adoptable without minor adjustments. So I think that's also interesting, because we use tradition, or tradition only works if it is constantly adjusted and worked with, and only then it can stay alive. And I think that is important, because we are not here to just copy things and repeat them, but we are, with every project that we do, we create something new and we work on that language. The other word is a classical, and of course a classical is something that is derived from Greek or Roman antiquity usually, but it can also, in the meantime, the word classic has become more known for something that is of lasting worth or timeless quality. So in these two words, contemporary classical traditional architecture is what we feel, what we call our own architecture. And I'll walk you through a couple of our projects. They are in different categories. So I've just given you a wide range, and maybe I will refer to one of the or two of the points again along the way. So I've already shown you this beautiful building from the 1970s. When I asked my uncle about it a couple of years, he said, "Oh God, since 30 years I'm not driving through this street because I hate this building so much." Yeah, and that shows actually one thing, that another very important thing, and that is responsibility. Architects and urban planners have such a great responsibility, because once a building is up, it will be there for a couple of decades. We can be lucky if this building is pulled down now after 50 years, but maybe it will be there another 10 or 20 years. So, and that's why I think that we need nowadays, and that's also how I was trained at university, each student was trained as if he becomes the most special architect. And every time you make a design, it should be something really special. And we in our firm, we actually think we want to step back a little bit. Of course, we want to do a project that has a quality and that is also exceptional in a way, but it should not necessarily be there, standing there and crying out, "Here I am." And so I think it is more important to look at that responsibility that we have as architects than to selfishly just build one special building after the other. Then more or less at the same time we designed, not me, I was 2 years old in 1974, but we designed in our firm a hotel complex in Canary Island. And this is probably the first time that we got into a traditional mode because of the location west of North Africa. The idea was to build up a kind of bazaar and get these Moroccan elements into it. So already there was the idea to have something maybe not classical traditional, maybe more vernacular or rural traditional, but yeah. And then this is probably the first classical building that we built in 1990. Before that, we had structures that were more postmodern and not looked at so much in detail. And this was, it looks like a residential building, but it is a small office building in a residential area though. And this building was also more or less the base of us being appointed as architects for the Hotel Adlon. And because at that time the Kempinski group was looking close after reunification, they were looking for an architect who could build a new Grand Hotel on the site of the Hotel Adlon. And they tried out a couple of architects, but they were not really happy. And then through word by mouth, they landed in our office, which was at that time, of course, much smaller. And we were appointed without a competition directly by Kempinski to do the design of the Hotel Adlon. And this building has actually changed the scene of architecture in Berlin completely. Not immediately, of course, but over the past 30 years, 20, 25 years. And whereas at that time, just to make a minor rustication on a ground floor was unthinkable 25 years ago. Nowadays, almost all architects do that. So in the meantime, we have a good dozen good quality traditional architects in Berlin, in Germany, that do classical architecture. Allan will show a few pictures later on, not only from other international architects, but also from other German architects. And but I think this was the breakthrough, which, of course, as I mentioned already, followed a huge debate. So we do, in our firm, we do hotels, to Hotel Adlon here on the Baltic Sea, a hotel, Steigenberger Hotel, in that typical Baltic Sea design. And here another project also in Berlin, the Titanic Hotel. So then what we do is office buildings. Our firm is actually more known for high standard residential buildings. But to be honest, the traditional architecture is much better applicable for office buildings, because in office buildings like here, you have the possibility to do fairly repetitive base. And so that sort of work is more difficult in a residential building where you have a kitchen next to a bathroom and you want to have a big window there and a small window there. I'll show you examples, of course. But so here we have a very an office building, and this is actually from our whole portfolio one of the most classical projects that we did, with heavy nature stone, with really intricate woodwork at the door. So here that that kind of granularity or that kind of approach, I think, is very visible. You have a building with a main structure with giant order, and the closer you get the feeling of the texture of the material, and you, even when you get in, you have that detail in the main entrance door. Here we have another office building. It's actually a refurbishment of a heritage building, and we've built a new building next to it. And at first glance they are very different, but at second glance they actually follow the same structure. First of all, we've taken the same floor levels, and then it is separated in 3 bays in the ground, and with these arched windows, and then the 5 bays on top. So even though they are completely different in appearance, they are similar in the structure, and they blend in very well, at least to my point of view. One more office building, so actually 2 office buildings here next to each other. They were built at the same time together with a building. So the project goes from here to here. And there was another high-class architect from Berlin, Grüntuch Ernst. They do very modern buildings, and our client chose both architects to work side by side. And that's actually interesting. I don't know how many of you are architects and how many of you are not architects. Usually that polarization, that black and white painting is more common among architects and architecture critics, whereas other people from other professions, they can actually admire and love both. In one point, they say, wow, this is a beautiful classical building, and in another moment, they admire a nice modern building. So I prefer this design, but yeah, that's only my personal view. Here, these are the drawings from the design process. Here, one more block of offices. It's 5 buildings here. 1, 2, 3, 4 buildings up to here, and a refurbishment of an old building. We actually had proposed to do something more prominent on the corner, but the heritage department wouldn't let us. And it's today this is the headquarter of one of the big TV stations. Yeah.
How much are you focusing on using the classical elements on the sort of outside of the building versus using those classical elements also on the interiors?
It's a good question. It depends really. Usually what we do is we do condominium apartments in the majority of our projects. And there we have usually the entrance lobby in a fairly classical way. I mean, there are architects that are much more classical than we are. If you look at some of our British colleagues, Robert Adam, that are very elaborate. So we have even in the interior then classical elements with a wall cladding and a flooring, but I would say not too much. And then the apartments themselves, they are fairly simple. And then the buyers of these apartments, they come with their own ideas. And when we work on villas, which we don't do a lot because for a company of our size, it's not economical, but we like to do them because we are building them for people and not for corporates. there we usually ask the client, and the same is happening with hotels, that they involve also an interior designer, so that we can then work together. And but I think, even though I think that the inside of a building is very important, and we spoke about this earlier today, how much can you also read the floor plan from the inside on the exterior? Of course, in an office building that is different. In the Hotel Adlon, for example, you can distinguish between the big suites and deluxe rooms and normal rooms from the facade. And but I think the point that I want to make here is more how the architecture has an impact on the people. And that impact, it doesn't have so much from the interior. Here we come now to residential buildings. Yeah, so this is a larger complex. We've built 2 buildings in that complex. This one here and one small building here, which I show you later on. It's interesting here to see the initial sketch and the way that we have built, coming back to readability, and also to the difficulty actually we face here in traditional architecture, because we had proposed here a giant order for this building. And if you have a facade like this, you cannot move the window by a centimeter or make it larger or wider. All has to be in exact that grid. And we see already here that we needed more balconies. There are balconies on that side here, but because there are 2 apartments on each floor, we needed also balconies there. So one bay was turned into balconies. And then on the lower floor, it was even more divided into smaller apartments. So we have that loggia on both sides. Now, I think at the end, it is also interesting if you have a repetition or symmetry, that you break that repetition or symmetry at somewhere, so that you also break that monotony. But at the same time, you can see here that we also end up in a conflict, in a design conflict sometimes. Yeah. Then we have here much simpler buildings. Yeah. So this is also from our office, but this is really reduced. Yeah. So I want to give you also the spectrum of our work. And here you can also read in the facade better the living rooms, the other bedrooms, and the loggia. This is the same buildings from above. It's 3 buildings in a complex, and so some of the work is more simple, and some is more elaborate. And I'm showing this project because also it comes back to that idea of granularity, because here this was one site, so it could have been, we could have also built it as one big block with one architectural language, but we deliberately, because this is more or less the typical Berlin parcel or plot size, we've deliberately turned it into 4 buildings. They are more or less identical in floor plan, except for the sides, because they were because of the shape of the plot. So we've got a repetition for the developer. We've got that how do you call it? Come to it in a moment. We have a repetition here. At the same time, we have given each building a little bit of a different appearance with different elements, sometimes with color, sometimes with different elements. Here we have a fixed balustrade. here we have it in a different way. And so what happens then at the end, you have each building has some sort of you have some sort of identification. So if I buy an apartment in one building, I know exactly it is here, and it is not in block A or block B, or I can only find my entrance through the number, but I can identify it with the building where I live in a better way. Here, one more residential building. This is one of our latest, no, not latest, it's already from 2019, but one not so old projects. Here you see the early sketch, and this is actually how it came up. So we experience with more, we explore more round ideas. Actually, this is, I think, I don't know if it's also in Allan's pictures later on. It's actually a very common feature nowadays in architecture in Berlin. Here is another building on one of the high streets in Berlin, and I like this because here, first of all, it's all made of nature stone. Right to the top, it's a nature stone cladding, but it also doesn't use the typical classical elements. It is more the idea more into let's say a 1920s Art Deco, Art Nouveau way of design, and I think that shows also that you don't necessarily need to apply the traditional elements, but you can also play with other new elements or make up your own details. Here another apartment building with condominiums right up to the back, and again here you have that readability of the facade and the floor plan. Here you can see a foyer. So in the foyer, it is still quite elaborate, and then when you get inside, it is much simpler. One more apartment building in Berlin. And here is a sketch because I wanted to show you the way from the initial sketch to the finished building. So the final building looks completely different, but you can never make the second step after before the first. So we have a. That's the way. Then we come to smaller buildings. This is probably the more modern we get, where we still use a balustrade with some elements, and we have some details here. Well, you can't really see it in that picture, but it is not a typical classical order in any way. Then these are all smaller residential buildings. This is a complex. Here, actually, if you leave out just a few elements, you see that there's actually hardly anything on it. Yeah, it's actually a very simple building with only a few lines. And so also a question that we are asked very often is whether our architecture is more expensive than other work. And I always say no, because first of all, we have to compare, as I said earlier, the same quality. So if we compare a good quality modern building or a classical building, we have to compare to a good quality modern building. So, and both of them have, of course, their costs. And then the inside of the building, the walls, the floor slabs, the roof, let's say, all the technical parts are also more or less the same. And so it's only a few elements on the outside that make a difference, but it doesn't need to be a lot to make a building nice. And it was here, you can see it's a small complex in a residential area, and the client had another architect before who was doing repetitive modern blocks in it, and all the people around in that area, they formed a group and a society, and they fought against this project. And then we made an alternative design, and then suddenly everybody was happy, and they were able to take on the project. Then we also do villas, not very often. These are villas with one apartment on each floor. It's actually all on one side, these. And then we have single, small villas. Unfortunately, not like in London, we have these clients that want big palaces where we can design. So these are small, single family. Actually, they are single family houses. They're not really villas. This is one of the latest here in a little bit of a 1920s reduced classicism. And this is still on that picture, still under construction. It's in a small village. And we have taken down the house that was there before, which looked fairly similar, but we've built it completely new so that it blends into the historic center of that village. And then I make a small excursion to India. We have also, I set up myself an office in India in 2005 and was running it and operating it for almost 10 years. And it was in Goa, in the south west of the Indian coast, and there we did beautiful projects on the beach, which was a lot of fun, because here all these elements are made by hand in craftsmanship, and that's of course a completely different way than getting precast elements in Germany. Yeah. Some more. Here we did kind of, I would say, an urban repair in the capital city of Goa in India. So our site was this part here. And the client wanted to build in a new piece, an office building. And we did a lot of presentations also with the local heritage department, which is not such a strong body in India, but still. And we've put in this was the visualization. So we tried to keep somehow the same proportion. With here originally it was ground plus 1, and then the roof. And we have now 4 levels. One is here above. But we have tried to somehow disguise the 4 levels into 2 levels, so that it still doesn't break the scale of the area. And we have also used the same plots as before, because there was a smaller bit here and a larger bit here. So we have used that same breakup into one part here and a larger part there. And I'm very proud today when I go there. This was shortly after completion, that tourists go there and take pictures, because they think it's an old Goan building. And I want to come to one more project, which is completely different to all the other work that we usually do, but I'm very proud actually of it. we have made a concept of for the demolition and reurbanization of a piece of the Autobahn in Berlin. And I think this should be the way forward to think about new mobility concepts in the cities. And we have identified here that section of Autobahn, which is about 5 kilometers, connecting one Autobahn here with another Autobahn here, but it's actually redundant. It doesn't serve a lot of purpose because it was never completed in the first place, because already in the 80s people stood up and said, no, we don't want it. So actually the Autobahn stops here, then you have a 30 kilometer per hour zone here, and then it starts again. So it's completely useless, and it actually only destroys the area. And we have made a concept of how to reuse that space in an urban context. And we have identified that you can build here around 6,000 apartments right in the city center of Berlin, rather than have this piece of Autobahn. And we are proud because it actually landed in the coalition agreement of our current government that was formed by the end of last year. And then the last project I want to show, where I'm also proud of, is a small project. I showed it earlier. It was part of the one complex, where we actually won a prize, which is very rare for our firm. And it was a prize by the BDA, Bund Deutscher Architekten, which is a very modernist association of architects. And some of my traditional colleagues have tried to get in, and they were rejected. And we have never even applied to it. But they have a competition every 2 years or so where you can hand in work. And they have a jury, and with that jury they issue a couple of prizes, and then they have one prize for it's called the People's Prize. So people can go onto the website and say, this is what I like most. And we have won the People's Prize in this competition, which is kind of an irony, because usually we would never win a prize in that architects association. I want to wrap up with two things. One is a quote from a book of an author called Jan Gehl. He wrote a book called Cities for People. And he had one beautiful sentence there, and that is, I have to translate it into English, is that first we design our environment, and then this environment shapes us. Yeah. So the past 20, 30, 40 years or more than that, since World War II, architects have been shaping our environment, and this environment has then again given a huge impact on us. And I think in some of the living areas, if I look at some of the areas in Berlin or the banlieues in Paris also, where that impact was probably not always the best. So first, we have it's our choice to design our environment, but then the impact that comes back, we have to face. So I think now it's a turn that we have to change the way that we design our environment, and hope that it will have a better impact in the future. And the last thing, we spoke about collective memory earlier, and I think that traditional architecture has, we all have that collective memory, that's why we feel good. But this also leads to a collective wisdom. A lot of times a big group of people can make better decisions than just individual specialists. And it is interesting that in a country like Finland, which is supposed to be one of the most democratic countries in the world, that there's no one listening to the people, because I think there are a lot of people who feel that that out of spontaneous thoughts, that feel that we want to be in a traditional environment. And I've recently, in my last talk in Norway, there was a guy from London, and they actually made a research on that, and they realized that 95% of the people they asked, they made a big study on it, liked one way of architecture and urban design, and that is the traditional way. And there was 5% that liked exactly the opposite. And funnily, this 5% was all architects and urban designers and some engineers. And so what is so strange is that the people who should be the specialists think exactly opposite to a large part of the population. So I think it is time also there to be more democratic and not only have a small number of so-called specialists take the decisions of how we should create our environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I think that we are almost fainting here. Maybe it's not only because of your charisma, it's the heat, but it wasn't possible to add any more ventilation to this room. I apologize for that. But I think that everybody's sitting there, nobody's fainting, at least not yet. But I think that we have time for a couple of comments or questions, and then we'll invite architect Allan Strus to share his thoughts for us as an extra bonus for us all. But is there any comments or questions at this point, maybe? As start.
Hey.
Hi.
Well, great lecture. One question about the budgets.
Yes.
Once again, about
Yeah.
your projects. Have you acted as a total unternehmer, like the
No, I mean,
or you're just doing the design? And
so
can you
yeah, in our firm, we usually do only a small part. We actually only do the design. We also don't do the construction supervision, and we don't do the construction at all. But of course, in all our projects, we have budget limits. Yeah, so we very closely view these budget limits. And of course, there's very often we have to then scale down a little bit, or we have to change some choices of materials. And so we are still part of the team till the building is completed. But we have not acted as a turnkey, or not even as a general planner. Yeah, so we only do the planning of the building. Now, in the past, we were doing it up to the very detail, especially when we started in postmodern in the 80s. We were not doing that so much, and then the buildings didn't come up exactly the way we wanted them to come up, and that's when we started to go much more into detail. So we really draw it up to the last detail if required by the client. But then the next consultant comes in and takes it to the construction. Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
small
Yeah,
further
please.
question? So how can you control then the outcome? What are do you have to negotiate a lot, or what is the...
Well, I mean, It depends, of course, on the client also, if how much we are involved. So usually, since we do the construction drawings in our house, we have all the drawings ready, and then in that process, it's already been compared to the budget, so that we can see that what we are designing is actually buildable. So in that process we are involved, and then if the contractor then deviates from our design, we of course we don't have a say in that unless the client wants us to have a say in that, which is usually the case. We come and see the site, we say, oh, this is not according to our drawings, and then they have to either do it again or change it. Or the client says, yeah, well, but this was cheaper, and but in most cases that doesn't happen in our work. At least in Germany. In India it was very different.
But thank you. And then I see some comments. Yes.
Yes, question about materiality. What role does it play in your design? And is it an important part of the design?
Yes, I mean, that is also a long learning curve that we have gone through. In the first years, it was more the design that was important to us, and over the time, of course, we are, let's say, a more established firm also, where we can say, okay, but we want it that way. So in the, let's say, up to 4, even sometimes 5 floors, we like to build load-bearing masonry and then have proper plaster on it. That doesn't always work, especially with the thermal insulation that you require. And then, of course, and then also the we like to use wood and nature stone, so long-lasting materials. But again, it depends on the client. It depends on the budget. It depends on on the design of that particular building.
Kiitos. Sitten sieltä.
My question also refers to the earlier one. How much do you have prefabricated materials available? You were referring that in India, it was nice to work with the people when they made everything handmade. How is it in Germany? Do you have like different sizes of windows easily available? How costly they are?
Yes, I mean the windows are. That's a good thing nowadays, is that you can get every size and shape made. In the past, only if you had a number of more than, let's say, 80 pieces or so, it was really economical. Nowadays, that is much easier. But all the windows, for example, they are just made to our design. They're usually wood windows or hybrid windows, and they are easily made. Some of the facade elements, they come in prefabricated elements that are then put together. I mean, there are plaster elements, but they are not made on site by the mason, and they are just made according to our designs. That is actually not a big problem nowadays.
You don't have any quality difficulties with that kind of windows, for instance. We have a very heavy winter here, and it's always the talk is that we have like problems with the construction.
The standards in Germany, I don't know how they are here, but the standards in Germany for, let's say, for thermal insulation and all these things are extremely high. I think in a European comparison. I don't know how it compares to Finland, but even though our winters unfortunately don't get that cold anymore, but still we have to make them for the worst case. So I don't think there is a big problem there.
Selvä. Nyt kohta mennään seuraavaan, koska meidät heitetään täältä tasalta ulos, mutta jos vielä yhden kommentin.
Yeah, one quick question. You have been working a lot in Berlin. What about elsewhere in Germany? Have you seen similar rise in traditional architecture?
in fact, it's more difficult in Hamburg and even more difficult in Munich. We have also designed buildings there and also built some, but it's been very difficult. Yeah, and we have built a lot around Berlin in the countryside or in smaller towns. That is usually not so much of a problem, but especially Hamburg and Munich are difficult. Yeah.
Do we have time for? There are so many questions.
One question, as you have been mostly working in Berlin and in Germany, would you be able to work here in Finland, considering that we have different regulations, etc., that would need to be taken into consideration and the winter that was mentioned?
Yes.
So, but if there would be a sort of project, do you work outside?
Yes, I mean we work outside. We have done in different countries. We have done work, and I mean you are usually not starting with the finished product. You're coming into the design phase first, and I think it makes sense also to have a local partner. And we, as I said, we usually anyway stop our work. Either we do the 1 to 100 drawings up to, and then we draw the typical details, or we can do the full construction work drawings. And I think somewhere in between, if you do the interface, let's say, and you have someone who then takes over and completes the drawing and takes them to the realization. And if that consultant, let's say, is in place at an early stage, then I think you can do a beautiful project together. And yeah, so I don't think I wouldn't have any problems in working at other places.
And let me remind us all that it was actually Carl Ludwig Engel, a German architect, who is responsible for the most beautiful historic buildings in Helsinki. So let's be proud of that as well. But Allan, please take the floor.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mario, for having me. I have to apologize a little bit. The initial plan was that I was supposed to give kind of introduction, encouragement, should I say, that things about what Robert was telling before can be done. But then we worked out that maybe it was better that Robert was going to speak earlier, and then I was trying to do some kind of a wrap up later. So I'm trying to adapt to his recent speech and see the differences and similarities. Maybe a few words about my background first. There's one thing which is very common between me and Robert, that is that we both love traditional architecture. And there are probably more things that are different. I don't come from architects' family. I started to study architecture in Tallinn in 1989, and then there was I think 4 years later, there was a life-changing experience for me, and I have to say a very big thank you to the Prince of Wales, who at that time was running something which was called Prince of Wales' Summer School, and I somehow unexpectedly happened to be part of it, and that really, I can say that changed my life. So I had been studying in Tallinn already for 4 years by that time, and then I saw all of a sudden within a few weeks that things can be done differently, which was never done and never said and never explained during all the previous years I was studying before. And so I asked Mario earlier that whether it was okay to say a couple of jokes, and she said, of course you can say jokes. And the first one is about our practice is a bit older than 20 years, And I don't remember exactly when that happened, but I think it happened when the practice was fairly young. So we had to defend the project in front of a city architect in Tallinn. And once we'd done it, the guy said, "Young person, can I have a question? Can you tell me whether you have a calendar?" And I didn't understand the question at all. I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Open your calendar and look at the calendar and see what year that is." And I think it was 2000 and maybe 3 or 4. And I said, "It's 2004 or something like that." He said, "Don't you see that this is not the way to design in 2004? That was the end of the meeting. So that was really a strange experience. And then a little bit similar one happened only a few years ago when it was not in Tallinn, but it was in a neighboring county. We had to defend a project to a county architect. And she said, this was a lady in, I think in the 60s or something like that. And she said, "Why do you want to copy something that was designed 150 or 200 years ago?" And I said, "Well, that's not the case. I mean, it's not about that. But may I ask you a question?" "Yes, please, go ahead." And I asked, "Why do you think it's okay to copy something that comes from the 60s and not from maybe before the World War I?" And the answer she gave me was actually really, I wasn't expecting an answer like that. She said, "Honestly, I've never been thinking about that." She was taken aback. And then the third, it's not really a joke, it's rather a very sad story. It's about a young person who approached us about 4 or 5 years ago. And he approached us because he had a very sad and disappointing experience. He, at the time, was not studying architecture, but he was a high school student with a great passion to architecture. And he had contacted one of the leading architecture historians in Estonia and said, "I need your comment and I need your advice. I want to go and study classical architecture. Where can I do it and what do you think about it?" And she said, "You can't study it, not at least here. And then if you find a place to study it somewhere, in some other place, it's pointless, don't do it." But he was very energetic and very brave young person. He said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, it's pointless because no one is going to need it. You will be jobless. There's nothing you can do." And so I think this leads us in a really devastating understanding that there is a very big gap. And that's exactly what Robert was pointing out earlier, that it's one of the biggest gaps I've seen in a society is between the professionals and non-professionals. That is, between the people who are architects, people who are not architects. And in most cases, people who are not architects like one sort of thing or things, and architects don't like them. And they're, vice versa. We are often told by architects, professionals, that examples like that cannot be done, and there are so many reasons why they cannot be done. The idea about this talk was to give you some encouragement that despite all these fallacies, they can be done, and they are done all over the world. Robert was giving a great overview of the work of his office. I'm not going to talk about our work, although there are some pictures of our work, but it's more about work done elsewhere. Also some project in Germany, but all over the world, mostly concentrated on Europe. Why can it not be done? Perhaps one of the most common comments is that it's pastiche, it's copying. And pastiche and copying something is supposed to be inevitably bad. I think it's complete nonsense, because there is not a word not a activity in human life which can be achieved without imitating something. And it's not about copying, it's about imitating what we imitate. But to take it to a very blunt level, to a very short and perhaps a bit arrogant answer would be that if pastiche cannot be done, and if copying is prohibited, and if imitating is prohibited, then there will be no London, and no Rome, and no Paris, and no Berlin. They didn't come out of tabula rasa. And the second argument is it does not represent one's time. But this is really confusing. It's very difficult to agree upon what is somebody's time. But even if you manage to achieve that kind of agreement, then there is a question, why is that important? Has never been in history, it has never been really important. It's never been the first criteria to represent one's time. It's been important to create something harmonious, something that lasts, something that is uplifting, but not represent one's time. It is not honest, is the next argument. But this is probably easier to tackle. We've dealt with that in a very simple way. Just put a sheet with a year above the doorway or somewhere on the facade, and that's it. We've never really claimed that the building is supposed to look older than what it actually is, or come from some other era. Then of course there is this vicious circle that builders say that we don't have architects who know how to design something like that. Then the architects say, but we don't have clients. And then the clients say, well, all we can wish for is what there is on the market already. So we can't deviate from what has been built so far. And then there are the town planners who say, you simply can't do that because there are no precedents. We've never done it before. So it becomes like an endless circle. You can't do it because it's not been done, and so on. The most astonishing one was the argument. I was reading an interview with a Finnish architecture historian or critic, I think a few years ago, who said there's not even a clientele for something like that. Things like that are not asked for anymore. However, I believe the most important thing is that we design for the public. We want the people and the public to be happy, and that's the common thing, what you were saying earlier, that when I was at university, we were told that there's a value if you do something that has never been done before. And I don't think there's a value in itself. I think there's a value if you create something which is really beautiful, harmonious, makes you look happy when you walk by, makes you feel happy. But to see a value in itself in something that has never been done before is a big question mark to me. So I don't agree with that. I don't also believe that we need to stress the conflict. There are so many conflicts in the society. Whether you look at the 20th century, 21st century, life is full of tensions. And I strongly believe that architecture should be uplifting, but also calming and provoking peace and harmony and happiness in your soul. And this argument is actually easily overcome, because in no other field of life that creation of tension or representing tensions in society has actually got any value. For instance, if this were true, we should build roads, new roads with holes in it already, designed and built into it. And yet we don't do it because we want the road to be safe to drive and smooth and fast, and as it's supposed to be. And yet it doesn't represent this way, it doesn't represent the actual state of the society, where roads sometimes have holes in them. Right? I think one of the biggest compliments we've heard from our work is that it was in a historic neighborhood of Tallinn. I was walking by a house we had designed probably about a year earlier, and it was finished the building process. And there were two really old ladies standing in front of the building, and I just by chance happened to overhear what they were saying, and one was saying, "Oh my God, this building looks here like as if it had always been here," which was not true. And the other says, "Yeah, but you see there is a sign saying 2012 on the doorway." And the other says, the first one says, "Yeah, true, but it still feels that way." So they noticed it, and they didn't have any problem with seeing the actual year of construction. It was much more important, the feeling, the way they felt about it. And so, for the encouragement, I also want to thank Mario for this wonderful job she has done in setting up this architectural rebellion, arkkitehtuurikieliin movement on Facebook.
Liittykää siihen. I encourage everybody to join it.
Right.
Unless you are already members of Arkkitehtuurikieliin. And they are throwing us out, by the way, right now.
Okay, so I'm not showing this, or how do we do this?
Maybe we'll share it.
This is a very short list.
Yes.
It wasn't put together by me. It was put together by somebody who set up the similar, on your example, the similar Facebook group in Estonia, but he couldn't unfortunately be here today. So there are a lot of examples done elsewhere in Europe. Many of them in Germany.
Let's just go through them.
I just go through that.
Explaining,
really,
and I'll figure out a way to share it.
Okay.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
So if everybody is given their email address, I'll figure out a way to share the recording and the materials.
Okay.
So unless you've already done it, there's a list up here. But now we have to thank our guests, Allan, Strus and Robert Patzschke. And I thank